Hello world, this is Stefan of Lindgren Games, and my lunch breaks are finally paying off. While I haven't made any progress on the game portion, I've made a modicum of headway on the video portion. Now these are just placeholder assets. These won't show up in the final product if I ever get there. But they are representative, which is to say if the game gets made and you come into it expecting a Minotaur, you won't find him, but you won't be disappointed in what you do find. Now, the main thing I want to achieve with these assets is really just the whole technical side of the video part. My first attempt way back long ago was ended up with having the characters inside of a big black rectangle. So, hooray, I managed to fix that. And also, hooray, I've managed to have the guy who's supposed to be in front render in front. uh, of course, if you're seeing this and wondering, why is the player the Minotaur? Well, that's part of the narrative for the game itself, or the plot, or whatever. Basically, I'm gone with why don't we make the players be the villains? The villains, they tend to be more artistically diverse than heroes are. That really came to head to me with Knights of the Old Republic 2, where all of the Jedi are just people in brown robes, and all of the Sith are very distinct. And so the plot for the game basically is going to be the villains have been defeated and have been trapped, but for 1,000 years, whatever. And then they come out, and the heroes are now ruling the world, and the villains are thinking, "Hey, that's not fair. We should be the oppressive dictators." So now and that's the impetus for getting the villains to thrash everything. And the plot summary brings us into today's ramble. What is a role-playing game? And why is a Diablo clone not also calling itself an action role-playing game? Yeah, there's just so much arguing over the concept of a role-playing game that it really can use some clarification. So I'll be going quite a bit more in depth for this. So I'll start off with a parallel question. What is role playing? It's when you say let's role play. What happens next? Basically, each person acts out a character, and then through their actions decide what that character does until the scenario is resolved. And so, and there you have it. There's role playing. It's creating a story. Well, it's a players creating a story through the actions of individual characters. You can have, say, a referee who's deciding what a character can and cannot do, but the player is or player actor whatever, he's deciding what the character does do. And so, which brings us to what is a role-playing game? Well, really, what really muddies that conversation is that the first role-playing game is Dungeons and Dragons. And yes, you have it in there, but you also have so much else. And that's because of this And it happened that way because of the story that Dungeons and Dragons tells. And that is Dungeons and Dragons excels at telling the hero's journey. That's that's why the game works so well. and that's and and because role-playing games started with the telling of the hero's journey, that's why upgrading elements are considered role-playing elements. You see, in the hero's journey, the hero acquires power, which doesn't happen in, say, dramatic stories. You don't have the hero acquiring his existential quandaries by getting stronger. However, in the hero's journey, he has to go defeat the villain. And to defeat the villain, he needs to get stronger. And there you have it. Which is, and that's where you also have the opposite role playing system, World of Darkness or Vampire the Masquerade. That is the system that excels much more in telling dramatic stories. In telling, well, it excels in telling social, so, well, stories revolving around social interactions and politics. With Dungeons and Dragons, it's all acquiring power and getting stronger. And let's face it, gladiator killing people is a spectator sport. That's that's also what propelled Dungeons and Dragons in popularity. So it basically had to start there. And then you have World of Darkness, where basically everybody is strong, but everybody is vulnerable. And really, you have it's all careful role playing to get you through a situation if you have a competent enough game master, which I wasn't. I just ended up with everybody having the vampiric strength ability and throwing cards around. With a good game master, though, it's all the choices that the players make for their characters. Oh, de-rambling myself. What is a role-playing game? A role-playing game is all about the plot is a mechanic. That's the that's really what that's the quintessence of a role-playing game. The through his character, the player is able to manipulate the plot. Now, of course, then what is plot? I found that a plot is the three acts of a story are answers to three sets of questions. First act, who is trying to accomplish what? That, that's where the movie Jupiter Jones falls flat. What is anybody trying to do in there? Second act, how are they going about it? Third act, what is the result? And so if the player is able to use his character to answer those three questions, then you have a role-playing game. And so why which so Diablo is not a role-playing game. It's straight up a hack and slash game with upgrade elements. not necessarily role-playing elements. And that's why I'm not calling my game a role-playing game, and that's why Final Fantasy isn't one either.